Welcome to the Today's Leader podcast, the podcast for the leaders and entrepreneurs of today.
Way to go, guys. Way to go. Keep it going. Good job, guys. All right, Paul, I see you. All right, John, let's finish. Sean, Coach Cole.
Good job, guys.
Hey there, it's Coach Curl here, and welcome to episode 295 of the Today's Leader podcast. Today, I share an interview with an incredible leader, and this conversation covers so much ground, it traverses over so much terrain, and it takes us down so many different paths. It's truly a fascinating journey. It's an absolute pleasure to introduce you to Randy Herbertson today. Randy is a recognised brand strategist and a creative director with over 25 years of marketing and innovation experience. Randy's training and experience includes roles as a corporate facilitator and consumer insights specialist, and as an accomplished creative strategist, where he's played a key role in a number of product innovations and corporate transformations. Randy runs The Visual Brand, a Westport, Connecticut-based brand innovation studio. And here he works with a large number of leading and emerging local, national and international brands and companies on projects that reach across the marketing mix. Now, during the conversation, we talk about creative DNA, the concept around the unifying idea around a brand, and Randy also shares some specific insight into My Way Forward, a blog that was developed over COVID. And we just talk about so much more. It's my pleasure, after a word from our sponsor, to bring to you the Today's Leader podcast, Randy Herbertson.
The podcast is brought to you by Think and Grow Business, the home of the Think and Grow Business Mastermind. If you're serious about growing your business, get serious and join a mastermind group today. Find out more at thinkandgrowbusiness.com.au.
And it's with a great pleasure today that I introduce to the Today's Leader podcast. I have Randy Herbertson from the great state of, well, just above New York. So how are you, Randy?
Hey, Tony, nice to meet you. Yes, it's the state of Connecticut. Yes, just a 45-minute commute above New York, but commutable. Actually, we had a lot more commuters than we do today about a year ago. So we have a lot more people who are remotely working out here now.
Absolutely. As I was saying off air a little bit, I once drove from New York to Boston, so I believe that I would have gone through Connecticut, but sometimes our geography goes astray, and I just had a blank at the beginning. So, so just above New York, but you have been a New York local. So tell me a little bit about the Randy Herbertson story.
So, good question. So I have been in the innovation field my whole career. I actually, when I moved to the East Coast, originally started in New York City, although I lived in Connecticut, which a lot of people don't live in the city. And about 2003, I started my first independent practice, innovation. And that is a word that actually I don't love using because, like marketing, it gets overused and misused. Yeah. And so a lot of times I describe the work I do as new products and services.
Okay.
And as such, it's a very right brain, left brain practice. There's absolutely a strategic part of that, and then there's a creative part of that. And the part of the way I've always approached that very holistically as a unified process. And in fact, over the last 20 years, I've actually built what we call a brand foundation, which is a modular sort of way of approaching the strategic part of the business, but it's completely designed to inform the creative part of the business as well. And so they really work hand in hand. And there are a lot of firms out there that do one thing or the other, that are strategy firms or just creative firms. And big agencies struggle with this all the time as well. In fact, what they call strategists are really planners, which is not the same thing necessarily. So we kind of bring those two things together. And the interesting thing is that it's very applicable across products and services. In fact, when people say, what do you specialize in from a category? We don't. We work on everything from electric vehicles and digital energy to snack bars and furniture and you name it. And so it crosses a lot of paths. It also works for very small firms. We love working with small startup companies, but also very, very large firms as well.
It's part of the business equation that I see time and time again. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't necessarily understand the importance of branding or brand strategizing. And when I look at your website at thevisualbrand.com, I see some of the people that you've worked with. So what compelled you to dive into that specific field that you're in?
So it probably was really having an ambidextrous brain, a right brain and a left brain. Because in fact, I've got a whole little model I can tell you about, but it's I'm what I would call a matrix thinker, which means that I don't work in a linear way, and so my brain sort of works that way. But even more so, I went to school with a dual degree in graphic design and business, and those two things I realized even when I was in school, really you have to come together. Even when we do the most simple creative project, we don't ever do it without having some strategic foundation, either that has been provided to us or that we create. And frankly, it makes taking the process through creatively that much easier. Because essentially it's creating the same criterion, the same language for both, creating something as well as for evaluating it.
So how do you work with a client? So just imagine I've come to you and I want to make my brand, I guess, pop or be really clear and concise around what it is. How do you use what you do with someone like myself in that particular situation?
So what I find a lot of times, Tony, is that and what we do is actually there's some very basic questions that are really built off of classical marketing, like the classic brand proposition. What is before because, right? Yeah. And what I also call like your unifying idea, which is what's the one idea that everything lives underneath? And a lot of times people don't have the answers to those questions, that they can't answer. They don't have them somewhere. And so those are the types of things that we look at. Another interesting thing we look a lot is what we call the brand vocabulary, which is what are the words that don't have to be invented words or unique words, but words that you use in a very specific way to describe your brand. Yeah. And a lot of times what we do is we help people literally build a brand vocabulary, which are words that, by the way, on a website are great for SEO because you use them somewhat consistently. But it creates what we call your communication code, which is the way you speak about your brand to other people. And frankly, then those words then come back around and then articulated visually, when you're doing creative. But they have a specific meaning for every brand.
But while you were talking then, I'm thinking about, the steps that many business owners or new entrepreneurs start to do. And they think about their logo and they go to a graphic designer and they've got an idea around what the logo should look like. They've got a concept of colors. And I'm guessing in their heart that they're thinking that they're creating their brand. But that concept of brand vocabulary is one that really resonates with me because there are certain words that you are using more and more in relation to your business. And if you can capture them within the brand, I suppose, concept, you've got to back a winner there, I would imagine.
That's completely right, Tony. And actually also what happens a lot, and again, back into facilitating the process, when you can establish a vocabulary, then again, you and your client are speaking the same language. So I always tell my clients to give me feedback in adjectives, okay? Don't tell me I want it to be red or, or the classic, I just don't think it's what I want, right? Yeah. Tell me you want it to be more aggressive. You want it to be more mild. You want it to be more masculine. You want it to be something. Because as a creative person, I could do something with that, right? Whether it's I'm writing copy or I'm creating a visual. And people really do ultimately have a base level of emotion for anything they're doing, even with the bank. So that actually is really helpful. And then as you describe what that means for your brand, it's going to have a nuance, okay? Yeah. And the nuance is really also usually the combination of the words that you use.
Wow. That's fascinating. Many times I've sat down with someone and asked them about their business and, people can talk quite openly and about their business, but it meanders this whole journey that they're going on. They're all over the place 9 times out of 10. And sometimes in that discussion, I can just pick up 2 or 3 words that they've said, that really they've just said it's just part of what they talk about. But because I'm someone new and fresh listening into it, and I say to them, you just talked about a drama-free workplace. And they'll look at me, and that's an example, and they'll look at me as if to say, did I? Because they're just so verbose when it comes to, and so I suppose ambiguous about what they're talking about. Sometimes it needs that person outside to actually say, did you realize you said this? And this is, and this seemed really powerful. So is that part of your process?
Completely right. In fact, it is, we'll talk later, it feeds into what I do with my blog as well. It's the old classic, less is more. Say what you can say in a sentence, not a paragraph, right?
Yeah.
And so as we distill it down, it is that simple. And what's great about that, not only is it great, and that's hard to do, of course, right? And that's why they pay us off and help them do that, at least initially. But also what's great about it is that it's very evangelizable. In other words, you can utilize it much more quickly. I mean, in the early part of my career in brand management, we'd write these tomes, these brand manuals, and frankly, they would sit dusty on a shelf because you didn't know what to do with them, right? You couldn't use them every day.
Yeah.
And when you have it instead something which is based off the single page elements, then they're usable. You can pull them out. They can be your primer, they can be your guide for things, and that's exactly the way we try to get people to use them.
That's excellent. That just sounds so relevant to so many of our listeners that are out there. So, and you work with people right around the world, I would imagine. You've got some big names on your website. Yep,
it's actually kind of fun because at this stage, funny, we work with some very local clients, but we have some clients we have one client we work with them in 80 countries.
Wow.
And of course, that's interesting too, because of course, part of what you do there is think of what is that going to be a universal language that's going to work in more places than one. And obviously you'll have nuances. But again, ultimately, if you get it right, you get it right. You get it right. There's a core, again, emotional reason someone does something anywhere.
Yeah, it's that emotional connection, isn't it? So I find you mentioned your blog, and it's mymovingforward.com for the listeners out there. Tell me a little bit about that. That looks intriguing, Randy.
Thank you, Tony. So the quick story on that, as I mentioned, this was my little COVID project. Early into COVID, and again, this also has that I'm an eternal optimist. Okay, so I'm always looking for not just what is the negative coming out of everything, but what is the positive things were coming out of that.
Yeah.
And so very early on into COVID, even before we knew everything that was going on, I said, so what is the upside? What's going to come out of this? So I happened to be trolling Pinterest because from a creative resource, I love it. And I decided to put up a post. And it sort of took off. It got a very, very, very large following. And Pinterest then wrote me and said, please take this down because it's not connected to any URL, anything like that. And I said, okay, I'll put my company website. And they said, no, that's not going to be completely relevant to this. So I said, okay, I'll start a blog. So I started a blog. And then I started to post frequently initially, now once a week. And now it's taken on a life of its own. But my theorem of it is a couple things. Number one is just in terms of format, I keep to 2, maybe 3 sentences. 2 is really usually what I try to get to. And I always have a visual reference that connects to it. And by my visual reference, I'd like something to be a little bit metaphoric. You can sort of get more out of the visual than just a description of the topic, which is sort of my goal with that. And then again, I also try to be non-political with it, and B, I try to always have some kind of upside to it as well.
Yeah.
Another thing I'm very careful about, I write in, I guess you would say, I'm in a we-they attempt, basically. So it's not, this is my opinion. I'm talking from a we standpoint to sort of engage my audience.
I've just clicked on one of your posts, and it's the belong more, hate less with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs sort of as the visual. And, it seriously is different from every other blog that's out there because, I could read this now and I'm going to because The blog post is simply, when we feel connected with a sense of belonging, we have community, which in the best case leads to empathy, perspective, and perseverance. Isolation leads to anxiety, depression, and hate. Finding and offering togetherness can be a life-saving solution for yourself and others. And that's a pretty powerful 2-sentence blog post that you've created there, Randy. So if the remainder of your of mymovingforward.com is similar to that, I think that needs to be seen by as many people as humanly possible, I would imagine.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate that. And honestly, my process now is I kind of write myself little notes during the week on what I'm thinking about and what I'm reading and what I'm reacting to, and then it just sort of comes together at the end. And again, sometimes there are a few of my posts that have continued to have big followings, and others that have less, but it's always something that again I'm thinking about that week. And literally when I post it, I just say, read my latest thought, and I say thought singular, because that's sort of my idea, is that this is not, you're going to read several paragraphs. And again, there's a couple blogs that I read that I love that are longer, but I even find in that, even in the longer post, there's something that grabs me, right?
Yeah, and it's so relevant. I mean, recommitments is the title of one of your thoughts, and how often do we see that coming through on our emails, the old re or the forward, or so I think that it's absolutely relevant and much needed. I mean, and the US is probably the biggest case in point, where our thought process nowadays seems to be incredibly binary. You're either on that side or that side. And if you're on that side, you don't like that side, and it becomes a personal sort of a attack, more so than an attack on people's ideas and opinions. And it's just, it can be really, people get caught up in that. And I think it's just, we need to have a broader approach of being able to take in at least the thoughts, ideas, and listen to each other and create some tolerance somewhere. And I think with my moving forward, I think you're doing something that I wish more people would do. So,
and Tony, it comes down to, we all can do something. We just have to decide what that is we can do. We all have busy schedules. We have lots of commitments. We have things that we need to do, and there are things that we're able to do. And ultimately, that's what I decided to do. And by the way, it's not the only thing I do, obviously, but it is one thing that it's sort of my, it serves me personally as well, but it is a hope that I'm putting out into the ether to serve others as well.
Yeah. And once again, it would probably be pretty hard for anyone to put any hate on you because of what it is that you're saying. I mean, there wouldn't be too many humans that can read, that 2-line sentence that I read out and take offense to it, or find something wrong with it, or what seems to be the general amount of discourse that we see on platforms like Twitter. You're an intriguing and a unique gentleman, Randy, so I'm really privileged to be talking with you today. So in your leadership journey and in the journey to where you are now, who's been your inspiration?
It's a really good question, and I think I would honestly say that I don't have one.
Okay.
Because honestly, I'm inspired. Frankly, I'm inspired more by actions than individuals. In other words, that there's something someone will do that I may not even would say normally would be my mentor, but I'm inspired by that particular action and what they do. And so I think that's the way I kind of like to lead my life. I mean, even people that, frankly, there are certainly people that don't inspire me for broader reasons, but there are some that do, based on individual things that they do. And honestly, I will tell you that I certainly have had my own business mentors. There's a couple of people that have carried with me my entire career that I have regular follow-ups with, that now are much easier on Zoom than trying to get together. But honestly, again, I look for inspiration, from lots of places. And the other thing too, very clearly, I would say very without any abash, I'm a staunch independent. So I find my inspirations on all walks of life, and that's the other thing I find relatively freeing, is they don't say, oh, I'm a progressive, so I only can be inspired by progressive people, or I'm a conservative, only inspired by conservative people, because I find individual actions by lots of people to be inspiring and worth carrying forward.
once again, I just wish more people were like that. I mean, when we register to vote a certain way, and to be honest, I don't necessarily fully understand the American voting system, but, if you're a registered voter, does that mean you can't change your mind? I've got no idea, but I would much rather be that independent sort of a person, be able to sum up ideas and make the best choice, not just always for myself, but thinking about the community that I want to be living in. So when we talk about great leaders, and right throughout history, there's been people that have been perceived or labelled as great leaders, and the leadership of today, and I suppose more importantly, the leadership needed today to get us out of some of the messes that we're in. What do you see in the traits of the past leaders that are still relevant today that people need today?
Well, the one interesting thing, of course, about past leaders is that we had less transparency in their full lives than we do today. So what we find sometimes with some great leaders today, because they're so transparent, that something will cause something to go awry, even in a great leader. But I think what really, comes from past leaders is when, again, ideas resonate. We know that something that was stated, that was done 100 years ago or more, or even more, is still relevant. And that's back to those universal truths. And again, I think sometimes it's not even just simply an act; it's something of the, let's say, even the bravery of the act. Of doing something that was very brave to do at a time that may seem commonplace today.
Yeah. So courage for a leader, whatever it is that they're facing, is a definite trait that you would like to see in leadership. So,
Tony, one other thing that, again, and I read long ago, but I also really believe in, is the old idea of the intrinsic or extrinsic leader.
Yeah.
So the intrinsic leader is that the extrinsic leader leads by force, right?
Yeah.
That was the classic Hitler and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Basically they gain leadership by force, and the intrinsic leader leads by belief. And and they've used religious people and all sorts of people in that camp. And the intrinsic leader is much more enduring. Frankly, when you look at through time, people who have led through belief have much more longevity, not only in their own success, but in their legacy in general.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. John Maxwell's got what he calls the influence inventory, and it starts with those horrible things like force and fear and, the lowest levels of what he would consider influence. And really the highest level of influence is when people follow you or are influenced by you because of the respect that you have. And that respect is built, from your own character, your own beliefs, your own values, and that integrity that sort of sits within that. So 100% agree once again. Now, in all of our journeys, we've got our inevitable troughs that we fall down or ski down or plummet down at times, and then we climb our way back up. So tell me about, I guess, your relationship with failure, and how do you deal with those inevitable troughs that come your way?
It's a good question. And again, I think it comes down to the fact is that we all have them, right?
Yeah.
And the other part, too, that I would say that I'm fortunate to have is, I said I'm an eternal optimist. I don't suffer depression. And so ultimately what I've always sort of found, and I've even advised, my young employees and my children and everything else, is back even to the name of my blog, keep moving forward. So even in the toughest times, you got to just keep moving. That doesn't mean move blindly, but just keep stepping forward, right? Because you will find the solution, okay?
Yeah.
And if you stop, that's where you're in danger. When you get lost in depression, you get lost in action. That's when you don't actually make progress. So frankly, it's a solution that's always worked for me. And then it also gets back to also not being afraid, because I think sometimes when we get in trouble, we get afraid. And when we get afraid, we stop, we make bad choices, we make, choices that don't work. So you have to, and that gets back into the belief in yourself as well.
Yeah.
Is that you can see yourself on the other side.
That worry and fear often becomes our most overriding drainer of energy. And because we're the pandemic's been a classic case. People just sitting there watching the news, getting their hourly updates from all around the world, and they're paralyzed. They're paralyzing themselves because of that energy drain that they've got, and it really does make it hard to, as you say, take that next step. And funnily enough, my wife and I run marathons, and I was mentioned before that, you know, that trip from New York to Boston, we actually ran the New York Marathon, and the whole concept about running a marathon is it's pretty tough to do 42.2 kilometers, or in your speak 26.1 miles. It's but it really is just, there are times it's just one foot in front of the other and just keep going, and it doesn't matter how slow, because I still believe the percentage of people that have completed one marathon is about 1% of the population of the world. So I think you're in pretty rare air if you can say that you've run a marathon. So, but very simply, one step in front of the other, keep moving, and ultimately you hit that finish line, which is an amazing feeling. So tell me, leaders or readers, I love my books, and a lot of people now swear by audio books. So I guess two questions, Randy. What are you currently reading, and then what book had the biggest impact on you?
That's a really interesting question, because the truth is, I will always point to the books that are classics that had the biggest impact on me, like Khalil Gibran's The Prophet, C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce. I tend to look at things that have stuck with me, that stand with me for the long period of time. There was another book more recently called Thinking Fast and Slow that also really stuck with me, and I can't believe I'm forgetting the name of the author right now. But I find it's the books that stick with you over time. I mean, I'm a big person of, I never rewatch movies, I never reread books, just my thing. But I find that certain things I will remember. I mean, I read The Prophet 20 years ago, right?
Okay.
And it still stuck with me. And so those are sort of the things that inspire me for the most part. And it's funny, I'm a trustee for a library right now, and so we talk about this a lot. What are you reading right now? And I always feel bad that, oh my God, I've got to be reading more things. And then I put myself out there to do that. And but again, I always come back to the classics. Actually I thank my prep school when I was younger to making me many classics that I still have in my library, even though I haven't reread them. I'm not sure the other day. I tell you one that I did reread, which was that it was Ayn Rand I'm actually named after her, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
But I did reread Atlas Shrugged, believe it or not.
Okay, awesome. Daniel Kahneman, was that Thinking Fast and Slow?
That is actually it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
So I just did a quick Google. Thank God for Google. So
Yes, that is a relatively recent one, and that is a great read.
Yeah, excellent. So get on to that, all my listeners. It seems like the very, very spans all three phases of intellect, and it's lucid, it's profound, it's full of intellectual surprises. So I find books fascinating, because it's very hard for me to sit here and say I've read books cover to cover, and normally I would be classified, I guess, as a bit of a speed reader, but when there's a concept in there that really resonates, I will go back to that time and time and time again. There's a couple of really important books in my life that I will always continue to share, and it's not because of the fact that I've probably read that book cover to cover, which sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't, but there's key points in there that have just made a difference, and I think that's what we all learn from books. I mean, if anyone's sitting there saying, I think my pile of books for 2021 is sitting at about 12 at the moment. They're all just sitting on a shelf just out of view, and I'll get there. I know that I'll get there, and I'll start pulling through them. But I think books are foundational in how we learn, and there's always going to be something in a book that you think, oh yeah, that makes some sense. What if I did this? And so I think that's always important. So with yourself, Randy, what's the vision going forward? So you've moved from I suppose you're almost a living example of what we now call as the hybrid workspace. You know, you're in Connecticut, you've got a fair bit to do still with the great city of New York, and I suppose globally. So what's the vision for yourself moving forward?
So I think, Tony, what I tend to, I think I clarified for myself are the places where I want to contribute,
Yeah.
right? And there are a couple of areas where I continue to do so. And number one is, what I call talent development or building young talent is an area that I've always been interested in. I've had internships for a long time. I about a year and a half ago started to be an adjunct professor at Quinnipiac University. I'm involved in a nonprofit called the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship for high school children in economic development areas. So that's one theme that I know that's going to be important that I'm going to make time for on an ongoing basis.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, also interestingly enough, I'm now a little bit of an urban planner because I'm now involved in the town I am because I'm actually here in a renovated post office, believe it or not.
Okay.
And downtown Westport, I'm a bit of what I call a rest-novationist. So we're going through a little bit of renaissance here, and of course then I got tapped to run the planning commission for this area to do that. So that's going to be my civic contribution. And then from a business standpoint, honestly, it's sort of one day at a time. But what I continue to try to focus on is on both ends. I find a great amount of satisfaction in helping young and small companies get started and find their way and get into the world. And frankly, they're almost a little bit like children. There's some that I no longer work with, but I still stay in touch with.
Okay. Yeah.
Both their success and, for a variety of reasons, we don't work together anymore. And then also it's in the larger companies helping to change culture.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, innovation teams are kind of come in and out of fashion in bigger companies. But what's cool about them, they're often let's call them the game changers, and it's not just always game changing, what your business model, the products you're in, but the way you do it. And so I find that's, in the best ways that could also help change company cultures. And that's also something I think that I want to carry forward.
Excellent. So out of everything that you've accomplished, what are you most proud of?
My children, I'll be honest. And they've had their challenges as well. For sure. But what I'm proud of is, frankly, not so much of what they've accomplished, but their approach to how they're accomplishing. Okay. And the fact that they're still accomplishing and they're figuring it out. But I will only say that I played a role in that. Okay.
Yeah.
But what I'm again proud of the fact that they are committed to it.
Excellent. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that I probably should have asked you? And I guess this is always my guest's opportunity to jump on a soapbox and sprout their meaning of life. So is there anything in that space that you want to share?
The only other thing that we haven't talked about, and this is just something that I think about a lot as well. So we talked earlier about communication codes. The way we communicate with others is a pretty critical thing. And so one of the things that I've done some pondering on, and I've actually written an article about it a few times and lecture on it, is what I call your creative DNA, which is, I referenced it earlier. And this is something that, frankly, a coach of mine years ago started me on, and I sort of built it out. And I found it incredibly useful in day-to-day life. And it comes with the idea of whether you are a matrix thinker or a linear thinker.
Yeah.
If you're a fast processor, meaning that you think of ideas really fast, or you're a considered processor that has to step away, and the way those two things intersect. And what's interesting, just like any other kind of test, people live in all different parts of the spectrum. But I will tell you that it is incredibly helpful in working with other people. And that's clients, that's employees, that's partners, that's anything you do. And it comes not only to understanding your own natural tendencies, but also what the people you're working with are. And the fact is that, again, back to our earlier conversation, is that different types work well together. right?
Yeah.
And that's the ultimate thing. If we're not thinking the exact same way is a great thing, okay?
Yeah.
So we can't all think the same way in the same path. Yes, there are times when that's great, but when we think in different ways, we can come together back in the classic 1 + 1 = 3.
And really relevant, I guess, to a lot of those startup and young companies that we're talking about, because often the founder or the founding group are very similar in style. They've potentially gone to school together. They've met at an accelerator. They start working together, and often what I've seen, and I'm certainly going to be looking up creative DNA once we conclude our interview. That's a new term for myself, and it's something that has tweaked my interest. But often we'll see with those startups is they get to a point where they stop being effective. And you've got a similar mindset, a similar thought, and so they're not thinking critically. They're not thinking outside of what the norm is, I guess. And I can certainly see that being of great value to the entrepreneurs that are out there, because if you need complementary skills, you need uniqueness, you need that person that can think, have you thought about this? Or so I think that if that's part of the toolkit that they can have and create within themselves.
It's not just finding somebody that's different from you, from a background, from a diversity, or whatever else. It's a different way of thinking.
Yeah.
Because I find some people, oh, look, I brought some people that are different than me into but we think the same way.
Yeah.
And back to the early point, so thinking the same way isn't solving the problem. It's thinking in different ways to solve problems.
Yeah, fascinating. That's I might have to have another chat with you just on creative DNA. That's really piqued the interest there. So how can people connect with you, Randy?
So a couple ways. So they can certainly do it through my blog, mymovingforward.com. My email address, which is just randy@thevisualbrand.com, which is my website. I'm happy to get it both ways. Like I'm sure, like you, Tony, I get lots of emails, but I'm another little theorem I like to say is answer all your emails every day.
Yeah.
That aren't spam, right?
Yeah.
But connection actually is something, and that's actually last really quick thing I would say that I also continue to do. In fact, I'm pretty, I would say, at a middle involvement right now in Clubhouse, which is a new social media platform that's grown here. I do another thing called Lunch Club, which is where you meet up with somebody for 45 minutes. It's an AI-driven platform every week. And because it's back to meeting new people, because I find in everything, and I'm very, very busy, I get something out of every single engagement that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Clubhouse is fascinating. I haven't spent a lot of time on the platform, but when I have, I found the conversations to be quite value driven, intriguing, effective, and you're not necessarily, from what I've seen anyway, you don't necessarily see a lot of showboating or self-promotion. It seems to be very much, I'm going on this platform to have a conversation and to share some of the stuff that I do. And so, and what was the other one? Lunch Club.
Lunch Club, yeah. And it's fascinating because it's an AI platform. So basically it learns and it matches you up with people. It's a little bit of a dating thing initially where you say, this are all my interests and this is what I do. But over time, you find that it gets better and better matches based on your responses to what it does. So yeah, it's been, I'm connected with, people that want my advice, people that I get advice from, people that are in my same field, people that are in different fields. And it's been a great use of time.
Excellent.
It's an hour and a half a week, and it's a really good use of an hour and a half a week.
Just another thing now for me to look up. So I'm going to challenge everyone that's listening to this to head on over to the Moving Forward blog page, the mymovingforward.com, and share in your groups today one of these amazing little thought blogs that Randy puts out, because if that's not adding value to the network that you're in, I don't know what is. It's certainly not a timely thing. It's a 2-sentence thing. that just provides so much. So that's my challenge to my listening audience. I'm going to do the right thing as soon as I hang up today. I'll be doing the same thing. I just find that wholly and solely fascinating. Randy, thank you so much for adding value to the Today's Leader audience and for investing your time in today's leaders.
Thank you, Tony. Enjoyed it very much.
Join the group of people impacted by seriously simple stuff to get you unstuck. The first book by Tony Coach Curl. Available at Amazon, Tony's Simple Stuff provides the tool for people to master your life and aspirations. 20% of every book sold supports Carter's cause.
Where do I start? There was so much gold today and really hard for me to choose just one of the topics to share my 2 cents worth. So I really want to just mention again and talk about how Randy is communicating with his blog, My Way Forward, and the simplicity of the message. And one of Randy's key points is say what you can within a sentence or two and allow it to resonate and make impact. And I'm in so much agreement with that. We've got a tendency in the world to overcomplicate things. We've got a tendency in the world to create long-winded explanations. The simpler we can make something, we can capture it succinctly, whether it's a brand, an idea, a proposal. So one of my questions that I'll just share as a bit of a challenge for everyone that's listening, how can you make what it is that you speak to more succinct, whether it be we reduce it down into that sentence, that context of a sentence, and how can you simplify? Because the more that you can simplify and make it succinct, the clearer that you will create it. So a huge shout out to Randy for investing in today's leaders. Don't forget his blog is at mymovingforward.com. And you can also connect with him through his business, thevisualbrand.com. Now is the time for you to take control of your leadership growth in the disruptive world in which we navigate. Our aim is to help you become the leader you need to be today. If you are looking to build better leadership skills, check out the Today's Leader website at todaysleader.com. Our website is a showcase for our podcast and our magazine, and we're pleased to say that our masterminds are now available as well on the website. This is supported by our network site, Think and Grow Business. Today's Leader is a collective mindset for the leaders and entrepreneurs of today, forging the path of success for tomorrow. We have the mindset to make a difference, the ability to create an impact. Think and Grow Business hosts our Today's Leader Mastermind. Think and Grow Business, where we focus on personal, professional and business growth. Book your free 30-minute discovery call at thinkandgrowbusiness.com.au. Don't forget you are standing stronger, braver and wiser. Don't forget the golden rule. You know what it is. Just don't be an arsehole. I'll see you all again next week. Bye for now.